Thought I'll change compared to my usual room that you see. I thought we'll give you a different perspective of the firm. So there we are. But I'm not the moderator, I'm the speaker today. I shall pass it to the moderator to do her tasks for the day.
Hi everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We have, I don't have to introduce Mr. Saravana, our leading tax lawyer. Today, Mr. Sarah will be speaking about voluntary disclosure. Mr. Sarah will be addressing the issues of when to do voluntary disclosure and whether when a voluntary disclosure is done, does it amount to admission of liability? And if you go on and do voluntary disclosure, can the IRB actually initiate criminal proceedings against you following the voluntary disclosure? And perhaps thereafter, Mr. Sarah will address as to whether will the IRB honor the promises, given by them in view of the voluntary disclosure made by the taxpayer or the individual here.
Yeah.
Sarah?
Thank you, Syafinaz. I've got these 4 questions, and given that we are now all moving to an environmentally friendly position, slides are all on the phone now. So if I'm looking at the phone, that means I'm looking at the slides. So now, I thought the disclosure position is something that I want to discuss, given that the finance minister in his pre-budget statement announced that he intends to bring in customs disclosure, and also I've been a lot of taxpayers asking me about compound payments, whether payment of compound, whether it's for tax or whether it's for income tax, does it amount to admission of liability? You'd have noted a few days ago, a politician, was released from his charges, of making false statement to the income tax department because he has agreed to pay a compound. And immediately after the media reported, his solicitors issued a press statement to clarify that payment of compound or admission of liability and so on. So why do people do that? So this is what I intend to discuss today in the next 1 hour, including the Q&A session. These are the questions we should ask ourselves. When should a taxpayer do a voluntary disclosure? There is no such thing. You got to wait for a season to go and make the disclosure, right? You could make this disclosure at any time. Of course, like cheap sale discount, discounted sales to get rid of old stock. The governments around the world from time to time introduce voluntary disclosure. Of course, the voluntary disclosure known as SVDP was introduced in 2018 to 2019 by the previous government. The Pakatan Harapan government's finance minister launched SVDP. A lot of hype, a lot of fanfare behind it, but I'll comment on that later. But prior to that, Malaysia has already had voluntary disclosure. When Dr. Najib was the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister, he also introduced a voluntary disclosure program. In comparison, I would say the original disclosure introduced by Dr. Najib was a far better disclosure program than what the Pakatan Harapan introduced, simply because when it comes to protection of taxpayer, under the Najib's regime, they give you a composite assessment. So when you do a voluntary disclosure, they give you a composite assessment, while the SVDP under the Pakatan Harapan government did not have a composite assessment. That's the difference between the two. And there is, of course, legal consequences to that. So when should you do a voluntary disclosure? First, you got to understand the law. Malaysia doesn't have a law to say that if you have underdeclared your income by $10, you must quickly go and do a disclosure about it. There is no positive duty required of you. It's like a traffic offenses, right? You're not supposed to beat the red light, but you do beat the red light because you're stubborn. You want to go fast. So what do you then do? You cannot go home, wake up one day and say, that day I beat the red light. How? It affects you, couldn't sleep. So what do you then do? You go to the police, traffic police, and say, saya dengan ini nak mengaku, saya sudah melanggar lampu merah. Do you do that? I don't think so. You do that lah. You make illegal U-turn. No police will make illegal U-turn. no one caught you. Then you go home, you feel very guilty about it. So you want to go and make a disclosure to the police. There is no duty in law to go and do that. Okay? When the law wants to impose a duty on you to make a disclosure, they make it very clear. A very good example is the corruption laws in Malaysia, where if somebody offers you bribe, you got a duty to go report that to the MACC. Okay? So where the law wants you to go and report something, they impose a duty on you. Doctors, if you go into a patient comes with a wound, a bullet wound, you got to go and report to the police. Someone comes with dengue fever, the clinic has a duty to report to the nearest public health office. So there are duties imposed on you to do something when the law wants you to do it. But there is no law that says you underpaid tax, you discovered, go and do a disclosure. We don't have that. Whether it's income tax or whether it's customs. But good practice, good governance, you want to go and do a disclosure. But remember, in making a disclosure, you make the disclosure, make sure your tax affairs are in very good order. It must be in a kosher position because there's a possibility of an audit being conducted. So you don't want to be in a situation where you want to go and declare to pay underpaid tax of $10, and then next thing you know, IRB or the customs come and do an audit on you, your whole business operations are then disrupted. Okay, so please be tactical about thinking when to do a disclosure, number one. Number two, does disclosure amount to admission of liability? It all depends how you disclose it lah. You know, saya mungkin terambil barang you, saya nak bagi you balik. It's different from saya curi barang you, saya bagi you balik. Right? You follow me or not? I terambil means accidentally took lah. You know, no intention to steal. Terambil je. Now I discovered not mine, I give you back. But if you go and tell someone, I curi your phone, now I'm giving you back. The fact remains you did curi, right? You cannot go and say I gave back, so no curi, cannot. So similarly, when you do a disclosure, just go, if it's the campaign period, SPDP or customs, you want to make a disclosure, I always advise clients, go and say, I'm aware the government is raising funds through this SPDP concept. The idea is for us to come forward to assist and support the government. I may have some gray areas of the law. I'm not so sure whether even taxable or not, but to err on the side of caution and towards nation building, I give you this extra dollars. Isn't that better than going and saying, saya memang tak bayar lah duit saya, you know, lama tak bayar tax, saya pun tipu-tipu sini, tipu sana, tapi sekarang saya nak bayar. You don't go and say that lah. If you don't call it admission of liability, what do you call it then? So be very, very careful on how you go disclose the payment. Okay, so voluntary disclosure ipso facto does not amount to admission of liability. But if you just go and pay the taxes and say I want to pay the extra tax and go on, I think it's all right. But if you go and see beyond that, I've seen taxpayers detailing out all the underpayments of taxes. You do that, then if you don't call it admission of liability, what else do you then call it? There is a Singapore case called Choppy. Choppy was a solicitor in Singapore whose partner committed at the time CBT, and therefore Choppy was under investigation. He was also suspected of CBT. Eventually was cleared, but the public prosecutor then I guess sent the income tax department to do a raid on him. So he was under income tax raid for about 2-3 years, he questioning for 2-3 years. He got very tired. He couldn't take the stress. Choppy is a lawyer, by the way. Yeah, he got very tired. He decided to pay X amount of dollars as compound. Not so much, less than 100,000 Singapore dollars those days. Paid it as compound because he didn't want any problem. Then the Law Society decided to go after him for misconduct and decided that to subject him disciplinary proceedings and found him guilty because he had evaded tax by the virtue of him paying the compound. Fortunately for Choppy, the Singapore High Court at the time, the panel being chaired by LPTN, the former Chief Justice of Singapore, said it very nicely. He said, Just because someone pays the compound does not mean he is admitting liability. In tax cases, people don't want headache, people don't want pressure, they don't want the stress, they go and make this payment. But that payment on its own shouldn't be regarded as admission of liability. So you can see how the choppy case gives us a good insight that admission of liability or payment of additional taxes do not ipso facto amount to liability. Then go to the next question. Can IRB or customs initiate criminal proceedings against a taxpayer upon receiving a voluntary disclosure? This is a tough question, you know. Can they go after you in criminal court if upon them receiving your voluntary disclosure? Answer is of course yes. Yeah, because the government did not say you come over and you come clean, to let you go of all those things. No, no assurances have been given to the general public that if you come and make a disclosure, no criminal proceedings will be taken against you. They kept that discretion with them. It means the government. That means they want to keep the option of prosecuting you later in court with them. That is the danger, I am afraid, with a customs disclosure. Because customs offences, as you know, is worse than income tax. Mere non-disclosure of certain things in the form or misdescription in the import form can result you in getting into trouble with the customs. Yeah. So look at the customs law. There's a lot of criminal provisions, and the burden of proof on the customs is very, very low in the sense that it all are strict liability offences. So please be very careful when you go and make a disclosure. Do not go and make an admission in the course of making a voluntary disclosure, because you must understand there is a distinction between making a voluntary disclosure in wanting to pay extra taxes and admission of liability. Why go and admit? The government only wants extra money from you, pay the extra money. Do not go and volunteer extra information. Don't get confused. Voluntary disclosure means volunteer. No, do not volunteer too much, right? So, because if you go and make an admission or an incriminating statement, then you're opening the floodgates or giving the opportunity to the Customs and Inland Revenue Board to go after you with criminal proceedings. Because remember, they did not make any assurance to anybody that they will not charge you or prosecute you in court. So please be very careful of that, yeah? And finally, will the IRB and Customs honor the assurances given during the voluntary disclosure? My honest view, no. This is Malaysia. Honor is a rare commodity in this country, and I don't think so. They will assure you the assurances given will be kept. And I can give you an example of cases to illustrate how they have departed from the promises they have made to taxpayers. So always remember, the Customs and Inland Revenue Board are regulatory bodies. They're not your friends. They're not there to go for you to go make payment, you know, and then you think they will honor everything they tell you. Do not fall into the trap. I think personally, all this voluntary SVDP and all these programs were a program to flush out all the tax evaders and the non-taxpayers, to get your data and record your data and then go after you for an audit. Isn't that what is happening now? Those who took part in SVDP are all facing audits. So moral of the story is, you know, if there is a disclosure, please be very careful about it. Look at all the consequences and make an informed decision. So I will start with a case, TP Srinagar Berhad, a recent case we did in court. Next slide. Taxpayer was under tax audit, and revenue came, and revenue said to the taxpayer, you got to pay income tax. Taxpayer disposed of some parcels of land and submitted for RPGT. IRB said, no, all this you got to pay income tax. Taxpayer says, but investment asset all this, how? No. If you're a developer or you have some form of development, however remote it is, you got to pay income tax. So taxpayer was hanging around, and you know, they were discussing and talking. Then SVDP was announced. Then IRB tells the taxpayer, Hey, it is SVDP. We want to make an offer. We will withdraw. We will drop the income tax issue. You pay a bit more lah, RPDT. Tambah lah sikit, you know. So taxpayer said, okay lah. Since all is under SVDP, they said, okay, you tambah lah, you know. So they raised taxes for 800,000 ringgit more. RPDT, taxpayer paid 800,000 ringgit. Money accepted. Yeah, forms all signed and given to the IRB. But IRB hasn't countersigned the form yet. So moral of the story, first point to take note. Do not make payment until the forms are signed. Okay, so until you are married, do not transfer your assets to your spouse to be. He or she is not your spouse yet until the marriage certificate is signed. Then only the union is is sealed, is legalized. It comes into existence in law. Until then, it is not, you're not legally married. So don't what's the word to use? Don't rush into making payment. Make sure it's countersigned and given to you first. So this taxpayer has made a payment, and IRB then comes and says, no, you pay income tax. I don't want your SVDP. So how much was the income tax? Nearly 100 million ringgit. It's about 96 million ringgit worth of income tax was raised on the taxpayer. So we filed for judicial review, went to court. We didn't get leave, but we argued in court that IRB should not act arbitrarily by revoking its own finding. Although we didn't get leave, we got interim stay, right? And next, we then highlighted to the court all operational guidelines. We say this is the position. You know, the IRB said they'll accept in good faith. You know, they'll do further review will not be made. How can you do all these things? IRB's reply in court in affidavit, that officer got no authority to accept SVDP. We can change our mind. We can decide not to accept it. The call is ours. So you now know SVDP was not what it was honored to taxpayers or not what it was promised to taxpayers. There's a real example of a court case where the revenue did not honor SVDP. And this is only the tip of the iceberg. You know? So very clear that it is a clear abuse of process, abuse of power, and you can see all these cases of legitimate expectation, like Sungai Gelogo, Hotel Central, where the courts have said that whenever you do a disclosure and based on a promise given to you, there's a duty for the revenue to act honestly, honorably, to accept it without coming and challenging it later. Unfortunately, in this case, all the opposite happened. Let me give you more cases on legitimate expectation. All these are nice quotes. Sometimes quotes may not be so practical for a practical solution. Supreme Court said unreasonable exercise and abuse of power, unduly oppressive, a violation of applicants' legitimate expectation to public authority. It's not fair to behave like this. Next. Again, Court of Appeal, another case says when the land office makes you promises and assurances, they must honor it. The conduct creates an expectation, and when you reverse it, then you need to be subject to judicial scrutiny. Latex. This is the case where they give you final certificate, sekejap dia bagi, sekejap dia tarik balik. Ya, yang bagi is Maida or MITI, tarik balik is IRB. So in this case, court said IRB got no business. MITI gives it, MITI tarik balik lah. What is the business of IRB to go and take over? IRB is not so superior as the government department. Yeah, it is another government department. No government department is superior to another government department. But the government department that awarded the incentive, they have the power to draw it, pull it back. IRB cannot be a busybody to go and vigilate or to go and supervise other government departments, right? So very clearly, court say when you do that, there's a breach of legitimate expectation. The nice English case, of course, this only happens in England, where they say when statutory function induces a legitimate expectation of a benefit through promise, the subsequent denial of such benefit
would be so unfair that it amounts to an abuse of power. And it is unfortunate that, although our courts have, to some extent recognized this principle, are not putting forward this concept strongly against the customs or the tax department. Finally, the ruling case, DBCL, when DBCL makes a position, when you make a promise, then you shouldn't go and make a U-turn of this particular position. Because it's not fair to taxpayers, not fair to the public when the government department keeps changing, blowing hot and cold as it suits them in wanting to reversing a position. However, the problem in tax case is we got this very unfortunate case of Toronto Theatre, where, if you remember this case, IRB taxed the taxpayer for RPTT, and you all will know, my friends, RPTT is official assessment. Taxpayer pays it, files the return, IRB assesses the taxpayer, then taxpayer pays the tax and then gets a certificate of clearance from the IRB. Many years later, IRB comes and says, you know what, I changed my mind. Yeah, I want to ask you to pay income tax now. It is acceptable if the IRB comes and says, I made a mistake, officer slept on the job, officer terlepas pandang, officer not so sharp, therefore we end up missing it, you please pay us back. I think that is all right. People make mistakes, government departments can make mistakes, and you want to correct your mistake. I think I can live with that. But I cannot live with a position where they come and say, I can change my mind because I am the government department, I can do so. This is not North Korea. Last I checked, we still have a functioning parliament. Although parliament may not do much work, because of a lot of things they have there. They may not go to parliament as often as they're supposed to go to. But there is a position in law that you cannot go and make a U-turn because you feel like doing it. But very, very unfortunately, our Court of Appeal said that DG cannot raise an estoppel against themselves from discharging his statutory duty. But the unfortunate position in this case, and I strongly think this point of law must be challenged in court again, because that is not even an admission for the revenue that they earned or they could have earned. They are just putting it and asserting it as a matter of right. And I think that is not acceptable in today's modern, functioning, mature democracy. I think we cannot have that. All government departments must have limited power, because when you give someone absolute power or unfettered discretion, that's where the abuses take place. There is no answer given by court as to once certificate of clearance is issued, the matter becomes final and conclusive. IRB cannot go against the principle. But what can we do? The courts have taken this particular position and decided that the tax department has the power and authority to change his mind. So that's where it's coming from. That's all fine. So these are the issues I want to discuss. Can you go back to the first slide, the questions I have? I think we've already received questions, yes, right? So maybe I'll go. So this is one. We can't put two slides together, yeah? We keep this slide, but can I see the questions? Let's see the questions.
The questions will be sent to me, Saravana.
Oh, okay. We'll short, okay.
Forward to you.
Yes. But you also see Queenie there as well, right? Can the argument of legitimate expectation be used as a defense? In my view, I would say it is a form of, it is a defense, it is a point to go and challenge it. So it all depends where and how we intend to go and challenge them. We want to challenge them in the court of law. I think we can. We did it in the TP case. We got an interim stay. So sometimes, as I always tell clients, you do litigation as a means to find a solution. Because when you are asked to pay tax, when you're asked to pay millions of ringgit, doesn't make sense to pay the millions, because once you pay, you're not going to get the money back. So in that regard, I think very, very clearly, it is a defense, or at least it is a position to kickstart a case in law in order to go secure a defense position. Next question.
I think, Sarah, there's one question on the requirements to be satisfied. Are there any specific requirements to be satisfied by a taxpayer before they can be, considered like eligible for the voluntary disclosure?
Under the scheme that they announced, there is no such requirement, my friend. There's no such requirement per se. But what they expect taxpayers to do is, we must, in our conduct, we must say that we rely on this advice. And as such, it's not fair for IRB to suddenly change its mind. I see. So there must be creation of that particular legitimate expectation. So we must say that we acted based on the IRB's assurances.
All right. So if a taxpayer actually opt for this voluntary disclosure, is there actually a risk that a larger audit will actually be conducted, or they'll be open to a larger scale audit?
I think the Malaysian culture is always punish the whistleblower, right? Remember, whenever you go and say itu orang curi duit, then they want to ask you macam mana you bagi tahu, right? You're not interested someone that they curi duit or not. That's Malaysian culture, right? So if you go and do a disclosure, my suspicion is they want to know more about you. Yeah. Unfortunately, and the SPDP and all that, I think they didn't create an impression of trust in taxpayer, in the authorities.
In that case, would the taxpayer actually gain anything from actually going forward with voluntary disclosure?
Sometimes no. What's the point? There's no assurance. As I said to you, we have a living example of revenue making a U-turn. Third Peter favors that. So very clearly, the IRB can do that. So there is no real incentive. However, Syafinaz, if we do it back under the earlier scheme, which is to give you a composite assessment, then it's worthwhile.
Right. Okay.
Because under the composite assessment, once it is given, the whole thing is then closed. Yeah. So the revenue cannot reopen those assessments.
Okay. We have one interesting question here. Can voluntary disclosure be done after audit has been initiated?
I think nothing stops. See, even the guidelines, the IRB's guidelines say that. But what is the logic of not allowing it, Syafinaz? What's the point? They should allow it, because your intention here is to get everyone to come forward to pay taxes. So what if audit has just started? The person wants to come forward and make amends to his improper or incorrect tax treatment. So why be difficult with him? Because the spirit of SPDP or voluntary disclosure is to go to collect taxes. So let's not forget about that and start to go and find nitty-gritties like this. That's my view,
Okay, let me see some more questions.
Quite a bit,
Quite a bit of
You
questions.
can see in the box from here.
Can
Can
you take that? Yes, that's one.
Yes. Please put your questions on the Q&A box. Okay, oh dear. Can see it, huh?
You can't type that.
Okay.
Oh dear, it's quite small.
Let's make this.
Can we make it bigger?
I think you can make it bigger. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Any penalty or compound to be imposed if registered manufacturing company wrongly or over-claiming tax exemption. Okay. Of course, if you wrongly claim or you over-claim, of course, if they find out, they'll ask you to pay you the balance, for over-claiming or, so, but here is very on the voluntary disclosure, depending on the terms that the customs offer you. The customs say, if you come forward and make a disclosure, I won't punish you, then it's all right. It's like this. You steal biscuits from the cookie jar, right? Your mom says, come clean. I won't beat you, but come clean. You come clean. See, yeah, mommy, I took the biscuit. Okay. So next time don't do, okay. But you go and tell mommy that, then after that, mommy, despite promising not to beat you, kills you. Then what's the point of owning up to her? I say, keep quiet lah. And she don't know where it went. Maybe the dog eat the biscuit. Maybe papa ate the biscuit. Maybe sister ate the biscuit. I don't know, mommy. We disappear. I don't know. You see, it's a very inside to become clean. Similarly, with this kind of tax treatment. So you got to wait and see for their, for their, what's the word to use? What is the full offer they're making? Will SVDP cover GST? Well, it can, but we really don't know, We really don't know, We really don't know where it stands. So we got to wait for the announcements to be made. But I truly hope the government will not repeat the shortcomings of the previous SVDP, so that it will be improved, so that it can given a real chance to be successful.
That's good. If you want to pay money without doing further admission, how do we go about it? Just drop IRB on the amount of money we want to pay, and without adding any further reason why, like ambillah bayar, take the money.
I think nobody will come and say nak bayar lebih, tak payah bayar. I don't think so lah. But now we don't have any special season for disclosure. But if you make, they may want to know why. They may ask you why, because they want to be, they may be intrigued. So make sure you got no other tax issues. There's one interesting question here. What is the difference between voluntary disclosure and amnesty like in Indonesia? Essentially, in Indonesia, the assurances was that they will not take any criminal court actions against you if you come forward to pay. So both are about the same, if the promises are kept, right? That means no criminal investigation, no charging in court, no extra questions, and no assessment being raised, not asking to submit a lorry full of documents, or coming and doing an audit on you. But there must be political will to do it genuinely, to do it sincerely. India has done that before successfully, disclosures. So in that regard, the government must give the assurances that I'm suggesting. That means once you make the payment, once you accept, we are happy, you are happy, files are closed. There must be composite assessment, it will be sealed forever. Otherwise, it is never a good deal for a taxpayer. If you want to pay the money without doing further admission, how should we go about it? Yeah, this is a question we asked.
So if the authorities require taxpayers to sign a standard statement on voluntary disclosure, and taxpayers can't change the statement, nor can they refuse to sign it, what can the taxpayer do?
I think you must tell them, listen, I can't sign all this nonsense, You say voluntary disclosure and you say, saya dengan ini mengaku terkurang bayar atau tersalah bayar. You don't go and ask mengaku and all that. It's not fair to go and ask taxpayers mengaku. You wanted to mengaku, you charge me in court lah. You go and do homework lah. The fact we do SVDP, the fact we do amnesty is because the government departments cannot do their job completely. There's so many taxpayers. So if they start doing audit on everyone, maybe take 10 years to come after me. So it's a win-win situation. I think we shouldn't, if they insist, then you tell them, you look at the amount, like $10,000 is all right. If you want to pay 20 million, 30 million, 40 million or 50 million, then you must tell them, listen, it's not fair. A lot of money to be paid. You want to collect 50 million from me and you want to dictate to me how the statement should be, sign an equity statement. That's not fair on taxpayers. I think then you're going to put your foot down and say you're not going to pay. And don't waste time with little Napoleons there. All the low-ranking officers. If you want to pay 50, 60 million ringgit, big amount of money, write to the finance minister directly and go and pay to his office. I think it's a better approach to take. You even do a nice check presentation ceremony and take a photo and keep it, So don't waste time with little Napoleons. Yeah. So following on a Truntum case, there's a constant fear. Of course, there is no guarantee that your RPDT is closed, Spenexa. They can open it up. In fact, IRB has a special unit called JASIC. I can't remember in Bahasa what is the full name, but acronym is JASIC. And their role is to review all RPDT clearances given in the past and the present submissions. So unfortunately, RPGT clearance has no certainty in law. Yeah. Next is by Mr. Ho, KP Ho. What do you mean by composite assessment? KP Ho, under the Income Tax Act, Section 96 capital A provides for composite assessment, whereby the taxpayer and the IRB can come to an agreement to do an agreement called a composite agreement, where you pay X amount of dollars for a number of years of assessment to close all your tax pending tax matters for those years. Once composite is signed, they cannot reopen. You cannot appeal, they cannot reopen. Okay, so that is what is meant by composite assessment. Okay, next question.
Sarah, what is your view on voluntary disclosure and IRB's recent step in asking for taxpayers' financial accounts at financial institutions outside Malaysia?
They got no business to ask that. Malaysia is territorial tax concept. You pay tax what you earn in Malaysia. You don't need to be. I don't tell me tax department got a lot of free time. They want to check overseas tax department. For why? They want to help the Singapore government, Australian government to collect more taxes. Unless you got to show clear evidence the monies are stolen from Malaysia or evaded from tax in Malaysia, sent abroad, then you go and check lah. But people earn a lot of money. People want to invest abroad because people are probably very rich. Children are studying abroad. They may want to retire abroad one day. They think foreign currency is a stronger currency, you know. So revenue got no business to go and ask taxpayers, existing taxpayers on the foreign bank accounts and all that, unless they got clear-cut evidence that money evaded in Malaysia is being parked there, which also cannot be, isn't it? Because the banks ask you 1001 questions today to transfer money. Yeah, and where are these monies kept? Singapore, Australia, UK, all are good economies, developed countries, corruption-free countries. You know, how are you suspecting that that countries facilitate evasion of tax and avoidance of tax? Of course not. So very, very clear. Revenue has no business to ask such information. In fact, Syafinaz, in one case I did, they asked a foreign country, foreign bank for the client's bank statements. They gave an opinion that the revenue got no business to ask because the exchange of information treaty cannot be invoked arbitrarily. They must have a reason to ask to show that the taxpayer evaded tax in his home country. They were unable to prove that, and the foreign jurisdiction declined to entertain the revenue. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a very long question here, Sarah. I think it's
Long question.
very long.
Oh dear. Why is a long
Rather
question
than me
here?
reading it, right? Some remission issue.
Okay, RMCD conducted a customs audit in March 2021 on our client and found import duty and sales tax in respect of face masks were underdeclared or short. No import duty were paid upon importation of goods because of the exemption given by the government. Yes. Based on the customs audit, wrong tariff code was quoted. At first, customs allowed our client to import such good without import duty. And now they want to change back after customs audit. All the imported face masks have been used to discharge CSR, not resold for profit. Client is planning for remission. Do you think our client have a good case? It all depends on the document. Is based on what you say.
Yeah.
Now, my view is this. I'm not so clear who gave the wrong classification or not. But the fact of the matter is, the importation of face masks, in principle, enjoys sales tax exemption. I think you all know that. The government made a huge publicity announcement when COVID was at its. I can't say COVID was at its peak because I think in March 2020 there were fewer cases than today.
Yeah.
But at the time, the government did give these assurances. So I think, in principle, if this particular payment, importation of these goods are exempted from sales tax, I think you got a basis in law to advance it. But you got to put a tight case for remission to show that the MOF really got the grant. Otherwise, it's just not fair to the taxpayer.
Right. A very a question on a very recent matter. Pre-budget statement. There is a proposed implementation of the voluntary disclosure for indirect tax for increased tax revenue. What are your views on that? Which is
First, I think government should not look at revenues, taxes, whether direct or indirect, to increase revenue. I think it's a very old-fashioned way of doing things. As much as we don't want to use Singapore as an example, I got to use Singapore here as an example. How the government doesn't rely a lot on income tax as a source of revenue. Of course, they do receive taxes, but the taxes are very low in Singapore. We rely on the government investments from Temasek, especially, to make up for the income. It is time for Malaysia to move in that direction, because it's not fair and it's very tiring and painful to ask existing taxpayers to pay more taxes. We're not increasing our tax base. We are pressuring the existing taxpayer to pay more tax. You've already milked the cow 20 liters of milk. That's the maximum the cow can give you. Maybe the cow can give you 22, but take 20 already. You go milk the cow and say, give me another 10 liters of milk. The cow cannot give you. The cow will fall sick. The cow will get fed up with you. The cow will kick you. The cow will try to run away from you, isn't it? Yeah. So we got to have a sense of fairness. If you think somebody hasn't paid tax, somebody got 100 Birkin handbags, or so somebody got a lot of jewelries and they've never paid tax, okay, then you go after them through the books and there. But don't go and ask taxpayers who are managing taxes in the best way they can. They cannot be a perfect compliance with tax. Yeah, you cannot be perfect. But if people are doing it honestly and to the best of their ability, I think we should accept shortcomings, okay, guide them, advise them, and tell them, okay, get it corrected. But to go and behave that, we want to collect more, how much are you going to collect? How much you want to collect with indirect taxes? You want to bring in GST, you can. The max you'll collect is 45, 46 billion ringgit. Isn't it? It was less than 50 billion ringgit. Indirect tax before GST was about 20 plus billion. With GST was 40 plus billion. That's the max you'll collect. Remember, GST or many of indirect taxes are consumption-based tax. Right? So you got to spend money. Come on, our income has dropped so much. I think M40, the lower part of M40 is already like in B40. The distinction is very, very blurred now. So people have no money to spend. So how do you expect them to go and pay more taxes? Because indirect tax goes back to me and you, That's why it's called indirect tax. You are paying for it. So I think the idea of wanting to collect more taxes is not there. But if the government really wants to go and collect more taxes, I think the cigarette industry is an industry to go look after, because a lot of cigarettes are being smuggled into this country. Yeah. So please go and get the borders, straighten up our borders, and say that you can't have this smuggling. Cigarette smuggling got to stop in Malaysia. To be fair to the cigarette manufacturers here, who are paying a lot of taxes. Similarly with liquor, smuggling got to stop. I think if you stop these two, you collect the more taxes you'll collect from the. That's one way to increase revenue, right? And now I've just learned that from Syed Sadiq that politicians can earn up to 100,000 a month. I didn't realize that. Now I realize why am I facing. We all have just joined politics and become young Borumats, So maybe you can go and tax politicians, extra taxes on them. I'm sure voters have no issue if politicians are being asked to pay more taxes. You and I work very hard. So, we pay the max taxes. Maybe a politician can have a different category, special taxes, windfall tax. You know what I mean? Even a politician, bekas wakil rakyat, current wakil rakyat, maybe they can introduce windfall tax and go and tax them at 50%. I think it's a fair proposition to tax them on 50%. It's quite easy money, isn't it? So government might look at this kind of creative ways to go and collect taxes. Go and collect tax from people who got 20 houses in Damansara Heights. Who got 20, 30 cars, who got 100 Birkins. Maybe this group got to pay more taxes. But it cannot be
the average working man and women on the street being asked to pay more taxes, whether direct or indirect. That's my personal view, yeah.
Okay, we can take one or two more questions.
Okay,
Sarah,
yes,
yeah?
please. Yeah, before
Yeah.
it's 3:30.
This one, in a voluntary disclosure program, can we include the word without prejudice? Would that, in your view, be helpful to a taxpayer?
I think we can say without prejudice because
Would that help in any way?
I think, but if you make an admission and you say without prejudice, if you tender it, you can dispute on the right whether it can be tendered as evidence. But I guess it's more of the body of the letter is more important. Of course, adding without prejudice helps you because only you can then weigh it, isn't it?
Yes.
Court. The other side can tender it as evidence. But if you want to just make sure your body is right, so no point admitting all the liabilities, then say, I do this on without prejudice basis. How lah? You cannot write. There'll be a contradiction in what you're doing. You can say the payment of these taxes is not to be construed as an admission of liability.
Right. Okay.
So I think the government needs more money, not only in Malaysia, all over the world. And to be fair, the government is working very hard to collect more taxes. But I guess it's the enforcement agencies. They must go and knock on the right person to ask them to pay more taxes. It cannot be the average person who's working very hard. Businesses are already suffering with the lockdown and so on. So to go and burden them with a tax audit, burden them with a tax investigation, you want them to pick up their business or go and sort out tax affairs. So the government has make up its mind. When I say government, the enforcement agencies, and be fair to taxpayers. Sometimes I see revenue giving them 7 days, 14 days. People are working from home. How to go and get the documents in 14 days? It may take time, especially when you want a document 10 years ago, 7 years ago, right? So these are the things that we need to look at in trying to find a tax system that is well received. Yeah. Any more questions?
One final question. Can the authorities actually reject voluntary disclosure and decide, oh, too bad, I'm not accepting this?
Make up the revenue, the customs make up their mind. How? You do a chip sale discount. You say this handphone, if you come and buy now, it's now $100. That's it. And people all come and pay, buy, and then say, I don't like your face, I don't want to take your money. How? Tak boleh lah. You are the government department, you're supposed to be fair. Yeah, you are like the parent, you cannot have discrimination. People, otherwise, don't do it. Then don't call it voluntary disclosure. Don't do roadshow, don't do announcements, and say, semua datanglah beramai-ramai buat disclosure. Tapi I will decide whether I like you or don't like you. I think that's not right. I think government departments should not be given that kind of discretion because that will allow corruption to creep in, Syafinaz, because then the naughty officer can say, tak mau terima lah. We know corruption is rampant in Malaysia. So we got to make sure that discretion is not given to anybody, especially to the civil servants. Discretion causes this. So let's make it very clear. In fact, voluntary disclosure, Syafinaz, my suggestion to the government is, don't need to go and deal with these little Napoleons. Do it online, like tender. Oh, why must I go and talk to an officer? Boleh lah, tuan, tolonglah, tuan, boleh lah, tolonglah. Ini macam boleh tolong, kasih sama tolong sama saya lah. Oh, you see, tuan, tolong saya boleh tolong tuan, macam mana? Is that not happening, right? So let's do voluntary disclosure, simple, go online. There's app for a lot of things you discovered now, there's app, If you can order goreng pisang and, and nasi goreng and one time roti canai through app, right? I can't understand why you can't just go do payment for taxes online. You can say, my name is Syafinaz, or mean Saravana. Example, underpaid income tax or sales tax, 200 ringgit for this year. Click, put, make payment option. Payment option, cash, GrabPay, credit card. I don't know lah. Then you just make a payment, finish. Government collects the money immediately. Without all these officers who come and harass you or you harassing the officers, right? So that is how I think it will be very smooth. And we don't want a lot of interaction with officers because COVID is still there. We are not free of COVID yet. So I think the government should do it online. Indonesia, I can't remember whether their voluntary disclosure was done online, but Indonesia has done a lot of tendering online.
as one of the ways to curb corruption, right? I think that's how we should do it, and I think it is something the government should consider, making all these voluntary disclosure payments online. Yeah. So final parting part, we all got to pay our taxes, what is due to the government. What is due only, not 1 cent more, not 1 cent less, but the government must also act honestly with the money being made good use for development of the country. Then I'm sure taxpayers will be motivated to pay their taxes. Scandinavian countries got very high tax rate, yet they got very high tax compliance as well. So payment of taxes are very, very important in that regard.
Okay.
Yeah. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
And don't forget, tomorrow there's a public law seminar. Can you put a flyer? It's at 4:15 tomorrow. Professor Azmi Sharum, who is the Deputy Chairman of the Election Commission, is going to speak tomorrow with our consultant, this is Shamuddin Yunus, in the same setting on reforms that is taking place at the EC, more on right of education when it comes to the concept of getting yourself educated. And I think getting education is not limited to schooling, but it goes beyond that, including taxes and how your rights should be protected and so on. So that is all. We got no further questions. We promised to end at 3:30. So let's do it. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.